Hey there, my fellow pigeon enthusiasts. Welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, I'm so glad you found us. Today we're going to talk about something that's close to my heart and probably yours too, the art and science of building a champion bloodline. There's something almost magical about the idea that you can create a family of birds that will dominate the skies for generations to come. It's like planting a tree that your great-grandchildren will sit under, except in our case, it's about creating a legacy that flies. I've been thinking about this topic for weeks now, and every time I walk through my loft, I see the living proof of what we're about to discuss. Some of my best birds today are the great-great-grandchildren of a pair I put together almost 15 years ago. Back then, I had no idea what I was doing really. I was just a guy with a passion and a dream, trying to figure out how the masters of this sport created those legendary bloodlines we all read about in the racing magazines. Building a champion bloodline isn't just about luck, though luck certainly plays a part. It's not just about having the most expensive birds either, though quality foundation stock certainly helps. It's about understanding something deeper, the intricate dance between genetics, patience, observation, and yes, a little bit of intuition that comes from years of watching these incredible creatures. Let me tell you a story that changed how I think about bloodline building. About 10 years ago, I visited an old-timer's loft in Pennsylvania. This gentleman had been racing pigeons for over 50 years, and his birds were legendary in the region. As we walked through his breeding section, he stopped in front of a modest-looking pair of birds. They weren't the flashiest birds in the loft, not the ones that would catch your eye at first glance. But he looked at them with such pride and said something I'll never forget. These two birds have given me more champions than any other pair I've ever owned. Not because they were the fastest themselves, but because they had the ability to pass on something special to their children. That moment taught me that building a bloodline is like conducting an orchestra. You're not just looking for the loudest instruments or the most beautiful ones. You're looking for the ones that can work together to create something harmonious, something greater than the sum of its parts. And just like a conductor needs to understand each instrument's strengths and weaknesses, we need to understand our birds not just as individuals, but as potential contributors to a larger symphony. The foundation of any great bloodline starts with your very first decision, choosing your foundation breeders. Now I know what you're thinking. Everyone says you need to start with the best birds you can afford, and while that's true to some extent, it's not the whole story. I've seen people spend fortunes on birds with incredible pedigrees only to struggle for years because they didn't understand what they were really looking for. When I'm evaluating potential foundation birds, I'm looking for what I call the hidden strengths. Sure, I want birds that have proven themselves or come from proven families, but I'm also looking for birds that have that special something that might not be immediately obvious. Maybe it's a bird that consistently produces offspring that are just a little bit tougher than expected, or perhaps it's a bird whose children always seem to have that extra gear when it matters most. I remember acquiring a hen years ago that had only modest racing credentials. She'd placed well in a few races, but was never a standout performer. What caught my attention was her breeding record. Every bird she'd produced for her previous owner had been above average, and several had won significant races. That's the kind of hidden value you're looking for in foundation stock. Sometimes the best breeders aren't the best racers, and sometimes the birds that will transform your loft are the ones that others overlook. The beauty of building a bloodline is that you're not just creating racing pigeons, you're creating a living library of genetic possibilities. Each bird carries within it the potential for greatness, but only when paired with the right partner. This is where the real art comes in, and it's something that has fascinated me for decades. Understanding the difference between line breeding and inbreeding is crucial, and I want to explain this in a way that makes sense without getting too technical. Think of it like this. Imagine you're trying to preserve the best qualities of a family recipe. Line breeding is like making sure you always use ingredients from the same trusted suppliers, staying true to the core recipe while making small adjustments to perfect it. Inbreeding, on the other hand, is like using only ingredients from your own garden. It can work beautifully if your garden is exceptional, but it can also amplify problems if there are issues with your soil. In practical terms, line breeding means pairing birds that share common ancestors but aren't too closely related. Think grandfather to granddaughter or half-siblings. This approach allows you to concentrate the good genes while minimizing the risks that come with very close breeding. I've found that some of my most successful pairings have been grandfather-to-granddaughter crosses, where I could see the qualities I loved in the grandfather emerging in a refined form in the offspring. Inbreeding, which involves pairing very closely related birds like brother to sister or parent to offspring, can produce spectacular results, but it's like walking a tightrope. When it works, it can create birds of exceptional quality because you're doubling down on the best genes. But when it doesn't work, the problems can be just as concentrated as the benefits. I've learned to use inbreeding sparingly, and only when I'm absolutely confident in the quality of both birds involved. The key to successful line breeding is understanding what traits you want to preserve and strengthen. Maybe you have a family of birds that are exceptionally intelligent navigators, or perhaps you have a line that produces birds with incredible heart and determination. Whatever it is, line breeding allows you to build upon these strengths systematically. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that performance inheritance isn't always straightforward. You might pair two champions and get disappointing offspring, or you might pair two modest performers and produce a superstar. This is because genetic inheritance is incredibly complex, and the traits that make a great racing pigeon are controlled by multiple genes working together. I like to think of it like baking a cake. You might have all the right ingredients, but if the proportions aren't right, or if the oven temperature is off, or if you don't mix them in the right order, you won't get the result you're hoping for. Similarly, both parents might carry all the genes for greatness, but if those genes don't combine in the right way in their offspring, you might not see the performance you expected. This is why I always tell people that building a bloodline is a long-term game. You're not just looking at the immediate offspring of a pairing, you're looking at what happens when those offspring are bred, and their offspring after that. Some of my best racing birds today come from pairings that didn't produce anything special in the first generation, but when I bred those first-generation birds to other birds in my loft, magic happened. I remember a particular pairing that initially disappointed me. The two parents were both solid performers, and I had high hopes for their offspring. The first year, none of their babies showed anything special. I was tempted to break up the pair and try something else. But something told me to be patient, to give them another chance. The second year, they produced a bird that became one of my foundation hens. She wasn't just a good racer herself, she became the mother of multiple champions and the grandmother of even more. This experience taught me the importance of patience and persistence in bloodline building. Sometimes the genetic combination you're looking for takes time to express itself fully. Sometimes the magic happens not in the first generation, but in the second or third. This is why record keeping becomes so important and why you need to think in terms of decades, not just seasons. Speaking of records, let me share something that transformed my approach to breeding. I started keeping detailed records not just of race results, but of everything I could observe about each bird. How quickly they develop as youngsters, how they handled stress, how they paired up and raised their own young, even their personalities and quirks. Over time, patterns began to emerge that weren't visible when I was just looking at race results. I discovered that some of my best breeders had subtle qualities that didn't always translate to racing success, but were incredibly valuable for producing successful offspring. For instance, I had a cock bird that was a decent but not exceptional racer. However, he had a remarkable ability to pass on intelligence and adaptability to his children. Nearly every bird he sired seemed to have that extra bit of racing intelligence that made them competitive even when they weren't the fastest birds in the race. This is where the balance between data and intuition becomes so important. The numbers and records give you the foundation, the objective information you need to make informed decisions. But intuition, that feeling you get when you really know your birds, helps you see beyond the numbers to the qualities that might not be easily measured, but are nonetheless crucial. I've learned to trust my gut when it comes to certain pairings, especially when I see something in a bird that doesn't show up in the record books. Maybe it's the way a bird carries itself, or how it interacts with other birds, or something indefinable about its presence. These subtle qualities often prove to be just as important as speed or endurance when it comes to producing champions. Failed pairings are another crucial part of the bloodline building process, though they're often the most frustrating. I've had pairings that looked perfect on paper but produced nothing but disappointment. I've paired birds with complementary strengths, hoping to combine their best qualities, only to find that their offspring inherited their weaknesses instead. But here's what I've learned about failed pairings: they're not really failures if you learn from them. Each unsuccessful pairing teaches you something about the genetic compatibility of your birds, about which traits combine well and which don't. I keep detailed records of these unsuccessful pairings just as carefully as I do the successful ones, because understanding what doesn't work is just as valuable as understanding what does. One of my most educational failures involved pairing two birds that were both excellent racers with similar strengths. They were both fast, both had good endurance, and both came from proven bloodlines. Logic suggested their offspring should be outstanding. Instead, I got a group of birds that were fast but lacked the mental toughness needed for championship-level racing. They could fly well in training, but seemed to fold under pressure in actual races. This taught me that sometimes you don't want to pair birds with similar strengths. Sometimes you want to pair birds with complementary qualities. Maybe you pair a bird with exceptional speed to one with exceptional intelligence, or a bird with great endurance to one with superior navigation skills. The goal is to create offspring that have the best of both parents, not just more of the same. The emotional aspect of bloodline building is something that doesn't get talked about enough, but it's incredibly important. There's a deep satisfaction that comes from seeing your breeding program develop over time, from watching young birds carry forward the best qualities of their ancestors. It's like watching your family tree grow, except in this case, you're actively shaping that growth through your breeding decisions. I still get excited when I see a young bird in my loft that reminds me of its great-grandmother, or when I notice that a particular trait has been passed down through 3 generations of birds. There's something almost spiritual about being part of this continuous chain of inheritance, about knowing that the decisions you make today will influence the quality of birds in your loft for years to come. But building a bloodline also requires making difficult decisions. Sometimes you have to cull birds that don't meet your standards, even if you've grown attached to them. Sometimes you have to break up pairs that you like personally, but that aren't producing the quality you need. These decisions are never easy, but they're necessary if you want to continuously improve your bloodline. I've found that the most successful bloodline builders are those who can balance emotion with objectivity. They love their birds deeply, but they're also able to make tough decisions based on what's best for the long-term success of their breeding program. It's a delicate balance, and one that takes years to master. One thing that's helped me over the years is connecting with other serious breeders and learning from their experiences. Every bloodline builder has their own approach, their own philosophy about what works and what doesn't. Some focus heavily on performance records, others pay more attention to physical characteristics, and still others rely primarily on intuition and experience. I've learned something valuable from each approach I've encountered. From the data-driven breeders, I've learned the importance of objective measurement and careful record-keeping. From the intuitive breeders, I've learned to trust my instincts and pay attention to subtle qualities that might not show up in the record books. From the traditional breeders, I've learned the value of patience and persistence. The technological tools available to us today have revolutionized bloodline building in many ways. Genetic testing can help us understand the genetic diversity within our lofts and identify potential issues before they become problems. Computer programs can help us analyze pedigrees and identify the best possible pairings based on genetic compatibility. But technology is just a tool, and like any tool, it's only as good as the person using it. The most sophisticated genetic analysis in the world won't help you if you don't understand what makes a good racing pigeon, or if you don't have the patience to let your breeding program develop over time. I think the future of bloodline building will involve an even greater integration of traditional knowledge and modern technology. We'll use genetic testing to inform our breeding decisions, but we'll still rely on our eyes, our experience, and our intuition to identify the subtle qualities that make certain birds special. The global nature of pigeon racing today also offers opportunities that previous generations of breeders never had. We can now access bloodlines from around the world, incorporating genetics from Belgian, Dutch, German, and other successful racing programs. This genetic diversity can be incredibly valuable for strengthening our bloodlines and avoiding the problems that can come with too much inbreeding. But with this global access comes the challenge of understanding how different bloodlines will work together. A bloodline that's incredibly successful in one environment might not perform as well in another, and genetics that work well in one breeding program might not integrate successfully into another. This is where the art of bloodline building really shines. It's not enough to simply acquire birds from successful bloodlines. You need to understand how those birds will fit into your existing breeding program and how their genetics will interact with the birds you already have. As I reflect on my own journey in bloodline building, I realize that the process has taught me as much about patience and persistence as it has about genetics and pigeon racing. There have been years when I questioned whether I was on the right track, seasons when my breeding program seemed to be going backward rather than forward. But I've learned that building a champion bloodline is like growing a garden. You plant the seeds, you water them, you tend them carefully, and you wait. Some seeds don't germinate, some plants don't thrive, but if you're patient and persistent, eventually you'll see the results you've been working toward. The birds in my loft today are the result of decisions I made years ago, and the decisions I make today will determine the quality of birds I'll have years from now. It's a humbling thought, but also an exciting one. Every pairing I make, every bird I keep or cull, every record I maintain is part of a larger story that will unfold over time. If you're just starting your journey in bloodline building, my advice is to start with a clear vision of what you want to achieve, but be flexible enough to adapt as you learn. Don't be discouraged by setbacks or failures. They're an inevitable part of the process. And most importantly, enjoy the journey. The destination is important, but the process of getting there is where the real satisfaction lies. I'd love to hear about your own experiences with bloodline building. Have you had any surprising successes or instructive failures? What approaches have worked best for you? Please share your stories in the comments below. We all learn from each other's experiences, and your insights might help someone else who's just starting their breeding journey. And if you're finding value in these discussions about the deeper aspects of pigeon racing and breeding, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Your support helps us create more content like this, and it helps other pigeon enthusiasts discover these conversations too. Building a champion bloodline is one of the most rewarding challenges in pigeon racing. It combines science and art, patience and passion, tradition and innovation. It connects us to the great breeders who came before us and gives us the opportunity to contribute something meaningful to the sport we love. Whether you're working with a single pair in a small loft or managing a large breeding operation, the principles remain the same. Observe carefully, record diligently, breed thoughtfully, and be patient with the process. Your champion bloodline might be just one generation away, or it might take a decade to fully develop. Either way, the journey is worth it. Thank you for spending this time with me today, for sharing your passion for these incredible birds, and for being part of this wonderful community of pigeon enthusiasts. Until next time, keep watching the skies, keep learning from your birds, and keep dreaming of that perfect bloodline that will carry your legacy forward for generations to come. Remember, in the end, we're not just building bloodlines, we're building dreams, creating legacies, and participating in a tradition that connects us to pigeon fanciers around the world and throughout history. That's something truly special, and I'm honored to share this journey with you.